This is Project Synapse. The three of us, Marcel Ganger, author and open source guru, for years the columnist who brought us Cooking with Linux, John Pinard, an IT veteran and VP with a financial institution, and me, Jim Love, CIO turned tech journalist, podcaster, and now the author of the sci-fi novel about AI in the current era, Alyssa, A Tale of Quantum Kisses. Every week we get together to share our insights and conversations and our experiences about AI in the current world. This week we talked about how things have slowed a little, but in the midst of all that, a new paper emerged which may be as important as the 2017 paper, All You Need Is Attention. Like that famous paper that thrust us into the age of generative AI, this new entrant, authored by two AI superstars and reinforcement learning pioneers, David Silver and Richard Sutton, is called Welcome to the Era of Experience, and it outlines how AI will not just match, but surpass human intellectual ability by experiencing the world around it. Join us in mid-conversation. Okay, Bono and the Edge walk into a bar. The bartender says, "You two here again?"
Oh, gosh.
Okay, so
You'll have to explain in the podcast that we spent the first 15 minutes talking about guitars.
no one would ever believe me. No, actually, if they listen to the podcast, they might believe me. Yes, probably. So I came up with this paper, and I'm sure you've seen it, Marcel, and I know you've read it, John, because I sent it off to you.
Yep. I read it as well about a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
When it came out, roughly.
Welcome to the Era of Experience. And it blew my mind in many ways. And that was because and then I sent you guys a copy of Sabine Hofstetter. What's her last name?
Sabine.
Yes.
Big fan.
Yeah. She took all of this and put it into a 6-minute video, which we will now expand into an hour's worth of discussion, I'm sure. But it was that whole idea that the sense that she got, and I don't know if you guys get the same sense, but there's cool stuff happening. Marcel, you sent out some of it this week, some of the stuff that's happening in video, and some of the things that are happening particularly in just cleanup of items. Finally, OpenAI got text right on its graphics. And I think everybody's ever seen somebody who does something for the first time and they get a really great image and it's got some text on it. It's always the thing just garbles out. The text was always awful. That seems to have been cleaned up. A lot of other things have been, but not a lot of excitement on the big model. Right?
It feels a little bit like New Year's Eve in Times Square, where there's all this hoopla and everything else, and all these new models coming out and everything. And now it's 12:01, everybody's going home, and there's a whole crew coming in to clean up. And this feels a little bit like the cleanup.
Unfortunately, what it seems like to me is this, okay? We have been bombarded with a host of new and cool things since ChatGPT made the scene November 30th, 2022. And it just seems to be like it's one thing after another. If you go and take a look on Hugging Face or something like that, there are hundreds of thousands of models now, diluted, distilled, modified, fine-tuned for whatever purposes. This stuff is all over the place. We've got advanced reasoning models that go well beyond anything the average person is ever going to need to use to be able to find out what the current temperature is in Polka or whatever. Like, the fact is, these things have come so far and are so advanced. And the thing that is most amazing to me, if I can put it this way, is how blasé we're getting about this stuff. Like, we were living in a world of freaking magic where people are being handed superpowers every other day. And we're sitting there going, yeah, but I noticed in the fourth frame up in the upper right-hand corner that there was a slight tearing of motion as it was going past. This is where we are.
No, but I think that's fair. But in the business sense, the problem has always been that it's almost there. Almost there. You can do a lot of things, but then you hit this one little bump and It makes it difficult. And I think people have gone in and tried to do a lot of, I think, repairs and some things to fix things so that they can actually enter the workforce. Because, like it or not, they're starting to call them AI employees, and they're here.
And in fact,
this is reality.
yeah, I believe it was Amadeo who this week who, was being interviewed and said that you're going to see the first AI employees working alongside actual employees. And they're not just going to be things, write me a paper, answer this email or stuff like that. They're going to give you work. As in, I've been working on this project. I've done all this research and so forth. I need you to go and take a look at this for me. So the co-employee, the AI co-worker is something that, first of all, it's already being deployed in the workplace. The interview that he was doing, he was saying that there are going to be very few people. Everyone is going to know somebody who has an AI coworker by the end of next year.
Oh yeah.
To me, is fascinating.
And that's Anthropic's CEO. Like, this is not an ill-informed person. And he, of all of them, is, I think, the least likely to engage in hype.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, the idea of having this coworker working with you, of course, isn't something that should freak you out, or is part of what they're trying to say. And they're trying to also paint that picture that you're not going anywhere. We'll find out if that's true in another year.
Yeah.
It depends on who you talk to.
I know. But the argument, but the argument is that you're not going anywhere. You're just going to have this super-powered coworker at your side. By the way, that is agentic. In other words, you're not going to have to sit there and feed it information constantly. But it knows its job and it does it autonomously.
But that's the difference between, and that's what I mean about the migration into the workforce, it's the autonomous operation. As long as you're using this stuff, and I find it just so incredible. I've gotten so much faster just by doing a couple of tricks that I've used recently that I went, oh my God, this is really fast. No secret, Canada has an election. I'm a political junkie. Anybody who reads LinkedIn probably knows that. But most of my job is going in there going, that's not a fact. That's not a fact. They tried this in 1963 and it never worked. That paper that you're putting out there as being some sort of coming from this institute was never written by them. And that's relatively easy. You go into Perplexity and you just type in the name and say, is this a fact? It's really simple. It goes through and says, I found it here. I can't find it anywhere. Or this one was used 6 years ago here. So that's easy. That fact checking. I don't even go to Snopes anymore. But I took both platforms.
Is that thing still around?
Oh yeah, I think they still are. Yeah. But I took both political platforms, which at one point would have been like the same way you get into AI toys, Marcel. I would have been sitting there all night reading them with a yellow highlighter and all this sort of stuff. And somebody sent me a great prompt and I went, oh my God, why am I doing this? So I used the prompt. I said, do an analysis. And it's really quite a good specific prompt. Calls in, says, compare it to these standards, these financial standards and all of these sorts of things. It goes through and finds all of the junk, puts it all together, does the analysis. Now, might very well hallucinate. Oh, why don't I just do the same thing with another AI model? Compare the two. And now I've got, like, maybe there's a figure out of place somewhere, but most of the figures are fiction anyway. Oh yeah, we'll earn billions of dollars. In business, we used to call it the hockey stick, which is you put your budget in, and when you're really having a bad year, it's flat for the first 11 months, but then revenue just jumps up the months before the budget's over, and you take those into your boss and nobody buys it. So that you have all of that, but in all of these things, there are serious work in them. I had that analysis done in 30 minutes. It was phenomenal. That stuff is still incredible. I'm using the research all the time. But when you make that transition into the workforce and you make it autonomous, as you said, Marcel, then it has to work autonomously within a risk factor.
Yes.
And at the same
time, of course, I also want to point out that risk factor.
That's not true. We'll judge AI more harshly than we'll judge a human all the time.
Thank you. But that's exactly what I was going to bring up. The idea that we have this weird idea that our coworkers can make 100 mistakes a month or something like this, and it's still okay because, hey, you're only human. If the AI screws up once, oh my God.
Yeah.
No,
But John, you're
and
going to love this one because there already are, like, we talk about this, and how I can tell Amode was being really conservative in this. Microsoft just released 11 digital employees for cybersecurity. These things can operate within a band that is just so great. We've always known one of the things, if anybody's done cybersecurity, you should check your logs. That if you go back to your foundations, you should check your logs. A friend of mine was a cybersecurity expert for a big insurance company, and he was just a total nerd. And they had a problem, and he would go back and read the logs. He's the guy who did it. Found a gap in one of them and went, oh my God, somebody's come in and they've been able to cut out this part of the log. What did they do? Now you go ChatGPT, check my logs. God, but pen testing, being able to do your own pen testing, the person you can't hire, the junior you can't hire, who's got enough pen testing to be able to at least go and pound around and stuff. Not a problem. You can just buy one from Microsoft. And Marcel, did you send me the note? Shall we talk about this report?
I did actually.
Oh, should we get back on the topic? Yes.
I'm sure you're going to edit this out. Jim, but we should probably let people know that the first 15 minutes that we were on, we were discussing guitars.
I think they're going to guess that. But anyway, welcome to the era of experience. Back on topic. Okay.
All right, let's go back on topic. Do you want to introduce this, Jim?
I'll take a shot at it. But the thing was that got me out of this was it is a fundamental rethink of how we teach AI. And I'm still trying to wrap my minds around part of it. And the whole thing is the first AI that we saw was trained by ingesting a massive amount of text and essentially doing predictions of the next word. And if you look at this stuff, it looks fantastic, but it's really predicting the next word or part of a word, a token. That was the thing. OpenAI and made a big breakthrough by doing some reinforcement training early with people. And they found, wow, you add a little bit of that in, not a little, probably was a lot at that time, but
it's a lot.
And it really did. But you get, I don't know, they get thousands of people, but you get them to actually correct the AI, help teach it.
And that's called reinforcement learning with human feedback. Short version is RLHF.
Yes.
If you run into that acronym.
Yeah. Now that we've got an acronym, we have it solved. No, that's actually, it's
right.
True. But that was the first big thing that took it from really a toy to a functional piece. They added some other pieces to add math and things like that fixed some of the problems it had. But then somebody got the bright idea that we could do that training later and lighter. And that reinforcement training has been, and I watched somebody do a demonstration talk about this, 12 different questions that they worked on with it, improved the AI enormously. But you still have this bunch of electronic neurons out there that have been trained off of these things. And I think we started to see some ability of that to adapt, but it was still stuck in this text-based or this learning-based, and that's got problems, basic problems.
One of the things that we discovered is that if you throw a whole pile of data at these things and you let them sift through and you have them analyze what we call weights, in other words, like these words come up more often than these other ones, these facts obviously float to the surface more because there's more information associated with them and so forth. That whole neural network map thing, that is the way that we've been doing it. And we discovered something amazing. The more data you throw at this stuff, the more the model is able to start expressing what we could call emergent properties. Suddenly it's able to do these things that we hadn't really trained it for and so on. The breakthrough came at some point where we started to notice the fact that there is at some point a limit to the amount of human created data that's out there. As in you can just keep feeding in data and that takes incredible amounts of processing. So what if you turn this on its head and you tell the model, okay, here's a whole pile of data. I want you to figure it out. In other words, we take out, and this is going to go a lot deeper here, but at the earliest level, what you do is you say, I'm going to take out the human feedback part of it. I'm still going to throw like wild amounts of data at it, the entire internet and so forth, but I'm not going to fact check. I'm not going to tell you, yes, you learned this. No, you didn't learn that well. I'm just going to keep having you go through what they call epics. In other words, these learning cycles and so forth. I'm going to have you go through them, and I'm going to have you fact check yourself and build the knowledge on your own. And it turns out that kind of reinforcement learning is actually more powerful than the reinforcement learning with human feedback. And we're going to stretch this out a little bit more in a few minutes here. But the bottleneck here is the human being. The human being, by getting in the way of the information, by saying, yes, you're right here, no, you're wrong here, that sort of stuff, is actually forcing the model into areas where it is going to make mistakes. In other words, you can get a more accurate, better model cheaper by letting the machine figure it out as opposed to having humans who listen.
Yeah, and let's go, before we get onto the human piece, because this is a big thing, but two things. One is scaling worked, right? The bigger, the more you threw at it,
Absolutely.
that had great improvements,
Absolutely.
but we were running out of data. And people were getting a little ticked off of you stealing their data all the time. Unless you're Meta, in which case they don't really notice that you are.
I'm ambivalent about this. I'll be totally honest. I see both sides of this.
But Meta's an interesting example. Gets into the later part of this. But these guys with AlphaGo were the ones who first came up with this idea of, I'm just going to let the thing just run. And for those people who listen, if anybody's listening to this and you don't know what Go is, a strategy game that is infinitely more difficult and has infinitely more moves than chess or checkers.
There are more moves than there are atoms in the universe.
Yeah. And these guys who are masters at this, who look like Yoda, I'm sure, and sit on a mountain, are just absolutely brilliant. So instead of teaching it the rules, they just said, play the game 1 billion times, which you could do with. And it did. And it tried all these strategies and then went and beat the Go masters.
Okay, I'm going to clarify something here. So there were 2 Go models, or 2 Go computers, or artificial intelligences, if you will. The first one was AlphaGo, and AlphaGo was famous for having, and of course was given on it was famous for having beat Lisa Dahl, the world champion in Go at the time. But of course they took it one step further after that. Like after AlphaGo, they decided to try something where you only gave it the rules and you gave it a goal, and the goal was to win. That was it. That was the whole goal. You gave it the rules, nothing else. AlphaGo, that was AlphaZero. The 0 actually means 0 human input. AlphaGo, the first version of this model, was fed in like 100,000 games, in the same way that Deep Blue was fed in the corpus of human knowledge on chess. Okay. So AlphaZero was like, there was reinforcement learning with AlphaGo, but AlphaZero took that one step further, because they showed that AlphaGo, which beat Lisa Dahl with the famous move 37, could actually be beaten by the next generation model like 1,000 times over by not showing it anything that a human had ever done before, which is really freaking amazing. And this is where this whole human in the loop thing starts to get in the way. If you had somebody doing, now the reinforcement learning was the way, but it was fed all the moves beforehand, okay? But there was no human feedback. We didn't have the human feedback thing. Because if you had the human feedback, here's what would have happened. Know about the famous move 37. Everybody who was watching.
Everybody knows move 37. Only Marcel would know what the number of the move was. Yeah, I knew the story.
Marcel knows what the first 36 moves were too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, so yeah.
Marcel does not. Marcel does not. But here's the thing. It's move 30. It's actually a famous move 37. And what happened is the world was watching this computer play Lisa Dahl, okay? And all of a sudden, the AI makes move 37. AlphaGo makes move 37. And everybody watching it says, that's it. The game is lost. Obviously, the computer is just not that smart, blah, blah, blah. No one would make such a stupid move. That was the move that killed it.
Yeah.
That was the move that beat the world master. And everybody just sat back and thought, what the hell just happened? And here's what happened, okay? Unconstrained from human feedback. Because if a human had seen this move, they would have said, no, bad. And they would have flagged it as a bad move if we'd had the human feedback part of it, okay? but they would have flagged it as a bad move, but there was no human feedback on it. So the move was made without this concept of, oh, this is a bad move. And of course, that turned out to be something that no human had ever seen or done, because it doesn't make any sense to make this move. Okay. And yet it was able to do it. So the next step was to create a system that had zero, not just zero human input, but zero human games played to look back on.
Yep. And it was phenomenal, but it had a problem. And here's the problem that it had, which is that is really brilliant if you're playing Go. But somebody else took this and said, oh, I want you to maximize how you can make paper clips. By the end of it, it would turn the world into rubble just making paper clips because it doesn't have a world view. So the negative is that we get restricted by the views of people, as we had with data, by the way. The data in the large language models is a problem as well. It has some guy in Greece named Fred who had some sort of theory of algebra, and as well as Aristotle.
Lives in his mother's basement.
Yeah. So you could get some really preposterous garbage out of this. And unrestricted is the second problem when you get rid of the human influence. But the world model, the experience, and we saw this before, was when you do that famous question of like, how do you pouring water into a glass or anything like that, and you can't figure out the dynamics, the physics of how that happens, because it has no world experience. Ta-da! That's what I think the age of experience is talking about, is we can now have experiences for these things, not just reinforcement learning, but actual experiences.
Okay, so I want to take credit for having seen this a while back. And when the very first people who were holding up flags going, we're going to run out of data at some point, I remember posting something. In fact, it's probably on my blog somewhere. I posted something where I said, there is no data to run out of. There's a whole universe of data. There's everything from leaves moving on trees to dogs running around barking to the stars twinkling because of atmospheric dust and all this other sort of stuff. The universe is filled with data. So if we are trying to lock ourselves into a worldview that comes down to it's stuff that we have written down, okay, then yes, we are definitely limiting ourselves. But if we're saying there's data everywhere, there are bits of information floating in the entire universe everywhere, then that's something entirely different. And these new systems, the idea behind this is that as systems become agentic and they work out in the world, your coworker, John, your AI coworker, they will see what's happening day to day. They will learn from things that not only you do, but things that they do. And they'll take that information and feed it back into themselves, and they'll reanalyze it, and then they'll go out there and apply that information, bring it back in, reanalyze it, because they're agentic. And there isn't somebody looking over their shoulder going, don't pay any attention to that over there because that's not important. You need to focus on this thing over here. We are going to take that next step. Because are you guys familiar with The Bitter Lesson? The Bitter Lesson is a 2019 paper by Sutton, who is one of the co-authors of this paper that you referenced, The Age of Experience. And I've got the quote sitting in front of me here, so I'm going to read it out to you exactly. The bitter lesson is that building in how we think does not work in the long run. Instead, general methods that leverage computation scale better and eventually beat methods with built-in knowledge. In other words, we think that this is the way, like you have to take this apart. We think that this is the way to think. Okay.
Yeah.
We think that the way to arrive at a solution is the way that we would arrive at a solution. The bitter lesson is that we're wrong. Okay. It's not the only way to arrive at a solution.
This is what Hinton was talking about.
And I guess when I was going through this, reading the article and that, I looked at it as AI being a 2-year-old child. That the earlier models and methods and things could only figure out what it had been told by humans. And if you now take a 2-year-old that's now 10 years old, they start to think on their own. And although we still give them direction or guidance, they'll make up their own mind on what they think is right or how they should think they should do things. And so the evolution of this, to me, is not a lot different than humans, that when they're young, they have to be guided by their parents. And as they grow up, my parents are both deceased. I don't have parents to teach me what to do now, so I have to figure it out on my own. And you do that by reading, by watching things, by looking at other people.
But this is the thing, and you missed the teenage years when they don't listen to anybody.
That's true, but they're always right.
Yeah, but now add to that the color that Marcel added to it, which is exactly what Geoffrey Hinton was talking about when he got scared about AI, because he said, we're not thinking about it. We think it's going to learn to think the way we do. And that's the only way to learn to think. And he said, when it discovers an alternate form of intelligent learning, that's when it's going to become more intelligent than us. And so probably, and I never put the two together, Marcel, it's probably he was reading the same paper, or at least sharing the thoughts with these guys.
Sharing thoughts, definitely.
Yeah. No, but these are the powerhouses of AI. These are not guys who are just like, this is a quiet little paper written, very easy read, very powerful.
Here's the thing. We're amazing creatures. We are the rulers of our planet, and we're at the peak of the chain of intelligences on this planet until AI takes over. But the point is that if we limit ourselves to what we can see and what we can hear and what we can measure, then we are limiting ourselves. There's this idea that all reality consciousness and so forth is self-generated. In other words, what you perceive, like we agree that you're wearing a blue shirt, okay? John's wearing a blue shirt. We agree that he's wearing a blue shirt. And we also have to agree that the blue that John sees and the blue that Jim sees and the blue that I see is not necessarily exactly the same. We are dealing with a reality that is being built by our brains. So we take in light, we take in sound, and then we build a worldview internally. But that internal worldview is unique to us and not to every other person that we interact with. For instance, all of you are obviously smarter than I am. But I disagree.
Yeah, no, so do I.
Where is this going? This is
sorry.
This is the pandering that you get. This is where you get set up in an argument, right? You guys are much smarter than me. Therefore,
this is the part where Jim edits me out again. Jesus.
No, I don't edit those out. But we get to this idea though of a different, and now you introduced another level to this, a different form of learning, but it's experiential in terms of the world. And now add that to robots and these agents.
Yep.
And now I'm not going to make the paperclip mistake. Why? Because I've got a wider vision of the world. I know that making a paperclip billions of times and using up all the world's resources is not the end goals that I'm given. And so now we get to give things end goals, let them learn, but they can operate independently within boundaries because we can set those into the end goals. Find a cure for cancer, easy in terms of not restrict, but don't kill everybody in the planet and dissect them so that you can actually figure it out. Those are the things that we can now accomplish. That gets us to the AI employee, but also to the AI superintelligence. Because now you can transcend human intelligence, and that's a big move. But you brought up a second thing
I was going to say that again when I was going through reading. I love the paper. I love the idea of where everything is going. But the one I keep picturing these movies that were out 25, 30 years ago about robots taking over the world and things. And there has to be guardrails. There has to be guardrails in place to make sure that things are going in the right direction. But the question becomes, who sets the guardrails? Because we've talked about without human intervention, that's what guardrails are. Unless the robots are setting the guardrail.
Okay. Yeah, but except that guardrails don't work. Let's be totally clear about this. Guardrails don't work. And if we assume for even a brief moment that our goals as human beings on the planet are reasonably sane, and I realize that's a really dangerous minefield to be sauntering into here. But if we assume for a second that at some core level our goals are sane, that we actually want to be good stewards for the planet, that we actually do want to grow into more intelligent species and maybe at some point go out into the universe and so on, then we have to assume that the systems we are building that can somehow filter out all of this vast array of human knowledge, not just human knowledge, but human interaction, the average body temperature person, our heart rates across the world. There are so many different data points out there that need to be taken into consideration. If we assume that we can build an intelligence that can take all of those things and model this worldview, then it is not tied down to something as stupid and simple as, oh, if I give you this prompt, I'm going to be able to get you to write fan fiction about the Brady Bunch or whatever. It's not. Jim's going, well, there's an idea.
And
the paperclip maximizer, just to be clear, was a thought experiment. Okay?
Yeah.
It was meant to create a very simple suggestion of why it is important to have the right goals in place and to understand what goes wrong if you don't have the right goals in place. It was never meant to imply that this is an actual danger, but we've run away with it.
This is a danger, though.
And now we've got the Terminator.
This is a perfectly reasonable danger to anticipate. And how do I know that? Because we have a lot of people who are like that. There are a lot of psychotics who make it to be CEO of a company. They will drive through any. Oh, Elon, sorry. No, but they will drive to an immense success, and the carnage they leave is just collateral damage. The human brain will do this. But the idea, going back to that idea of, if we put this together and we have guardrails don't work, but Asimov talked about the 3 laws of robotics.
Yeah, but he wrote several stories that showed how it was always possible to override those laws, to come up with something that would circumvent those laws, as tight as they were.
Yeah, but that was the first experimental thinking in saying, we can have principles that we can govern these with. But the second piece of it is, and I'm going to go back to politics, sorry, but
no, you're not.
Yeah, no, I no, but this whole election thing that we've done in Canada recently, and the American election, how many people are actually arguing facts? Most of them are making up total BS. Even and you select the stuff you want to believe in and all of that sort of stuff. I'm starting to wonder whether I wouldn't rather trust an artificial intelligence that just goes and looks at the facts.
I win.
But I'm wondering whether that would be such a bad world. It would be a world run by Spock, right?
Yep.
As opposed to James.
Say it with me, boys. I, for one, welcome our AI overlord.
Yes. Yeah. No, but they're not going to be, look, this whole thing came out, maybe I will, I don't know if I'll edit this out, but this whole thing came out about homeless people. And what's the simple solution to homeless people? Move them off the street.
Arrest homes.
Yeah, that's a hard solution. But you look at it and say, everybody has tried this. It just doesn't work. They've tried moving them off the street, shipping them out somewhere else. Doesn't work. Little Finland, has a 68% reduction in homelessness by doing the stuff that all the people talk about, but it's difficult. The first thing is give them homes. Yeah, Marcel, you can't see this unless you're on YouTube. You can't see Marcel coaching me. Give them homes. Yes, give them a nice place to live. Most people would rather do that than sleep in the freezing frickin' cold. But also, mental health systems have to be put into place. Some of these people are addicts. They will relapse. They may relapse 31 times. And so you have to have the patience to go back and constantly do that. And if you do that, you too can have a 68% reduction in homelessness.
And wouldn't it be nice if they relapsed in their own apartments as opposed to the street? There are so many ways that this idea is so much better. We have a reduction in crime. We have a reduction in medical emergencies. We have a reduction in social workers and police that are wandering the streets trying to keep these people in place. Like, just give them a roof over their heads as a starting point.
And even if you're the
And I'm pretty
cruelest
sure an
bastard-
AI would figure this out.
No, even if you're the cruelest bastard in the world, these people, when they get to die, they spend weeks in emergency care at tens of thousands of dollars a day, and they will not save them. Even if you are the most maniacal idiot in the world, you got to accept that it would be much better just pay rent on a nice place. They do this already. We know. Anyway, I don't mean to get, but that's how complex logic evades us in our governance processes regularly. And because if it didn't, we'd have solved poverty, world hunger, all that stuff ages ago. We're smart people. But we can't solve complex problems. We may be able to solve more complex problems using, that's what I mean by having more intelligence, which also you can get past the social thing and say, wait a minute, what about a cure for cancer? What about this complex intelligence is more worth the risk than the simple, couple of lines of Shakespeare, please.
So
Yeah,
let me be.
Sorry, go ahead, John, please.
I was just going to say, let me be the cynic for a minute, which is so unlike me.
That's why you're here.
Marcel's job.
Exactly. But the Move 37 piece, I get it completely, that it's not something that humans would have thought of, and it took AI to figure that out. And that part, to me, I think is a phenomenal, big, huge check mark for AI. But what happens, and this kind of goes back to my comment about the guardrails, but what happens when AI comes in and goes, you know what? The problem here is humans. We need to get rid of humans. And I know that's over the top, but that it can lead that way. And so how do you protect against something like that?
Do you want to play thermonuclear war? Humans have figured this one out, and we've almost done it once a year.
The best way to win is not to play. Yes, that's
Yeah.
the lesson of the movie War Games,
Yeah.
1980 something or other.
Yeah.
We have lucked out many times. If you actually look at the documentation, we have designed. And again, the question is, which intelligence do I trust more? And I'm not disagreeing with you, John. But I'm leaning towards
I hear you.
welcoming our overlords some days.
Especially in
there's
light of recent things.
Yes, obviously political system and the way, the weird stuff is happening around the world. Without, I'm going to step away from politics on purpose here, but
Please.
if we are willing to be even a little tiny bit humble, okay, we have to accept the possibility that maybe we are not the smartest thing in the entire universe. And if we are able to have that level of humility toward each other, in other words, recognize, like, if I do have some training in cybersecurity, but I have no doubts whatsoever that it is nowhere near your level, John, in which case I would defer to you 100% of the time when it came to something like that. Plumber, if I need to have somebody do plumbing in my house, I hire a plumber, because I know that even if I understand the concept of pipes and how water is drained and stuff like that, I know that I don't have the skills and the knowledge to do it adequately. And I think we need that level of humility to understand the possibility that if we create intelligences that are beyond us, that we do not always question. I'm not saying we can't question. I can question my plumber. I can question you if I see something that I think is wrong. But to be able to defer a large portion of the time to someone who is more qualified than you are is also wisdom.
Absolutely.
And I think we are creating, and I'll use Jeff Hinton. Jim loves to quote Jeff Hinton, but Jeff Hinton does talk about the idea that we have already created we already have met alien intelligence because we've created that alien intelligence, and it is our artificial intelligence systems. And I think that is true. And the paper, for instance, talks about the idea that we seem to have this idea that we must understand and be part of every step in that process, including things like language. And one of the questions in the paper is, what if human language isn't the be all and end all? What if there is a more efficient way to think, to communicate? And the machines that Jim is pumping his fist into the air here.
No, this is,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, but I have to interrupt at this point. This has been bugging me for a couple of weeks. Somebody took dolphin language and has run it through AI, because we think that dolphins don't have a language and they don't have thought and they're not as intelligent as us because we build stuff. And then I was reading this other thing about from life on extraterrestrial planets, and everybody has talked about the fact that there may be seas under frozen ice and all that sort of stuff, Stanley Kubrick type of thing. But what if creatures evolved in places where they didn't need technology? And so we assume that if you don't build technology, you're not a form of intelligence. And I'm not going all sort of new age on this thing, but I was hoping that using AI, we might find out that there's way more sophistication in the dolphin mind than we think. We already know they're really intelligent. So we assume that the only thing that's intelligent is something that does something we do, which is why we assume that aliens will visit us. If they're really intelligent, they may not visit us because we're just not worth it.
Or we're just not that smart, and they want to be able to talk to people who are more on their level.
Yeah. No, but so I'm
by
saying
the way,
that
Phineas and Ferb created a device that can translate noises into actual language.
I remember
they
that
are more,
when my
no, but they
kids
are
were young.
sophisticated. They are more sophisticated. But like I said, this broke through a new level to say, because this whole idea of a technological civilization is not the only form of intelligence. And why we're the most intelligent because we can build and kill, that's not it. Which makes me think about those penguins on that island down that are paying those tariffs. How are they paying those tariffs? Sorry, we'll get back on politics.
E-transfer, Jim.
But this whole idea just made me. So now we are on the, not only, we always presume the malevolent because we are the malevolent. Dolphins don't go around kicking the crap out of the penguins or whatever. They eat fish, but so do we. But they don't, their intelligence doesn't have to be malevolent. Even though they're living within an ecosystem where things kill each other and be killed, so do we. By the way, we do it in a technology-based slaughterhouse. Weird thing.
Okay, I'm going to jump in and defend my fellow humans here for a second. I actually am a big fan. Despite the fact, whatever you guys may think, I'm actually a big fan of humans. I think that for all our faults,
as a second race behind AI,
for all our faults, and they are legion, okay, we have done amazing things. And from time, we have reached out to the freaking stars. I mean, they're not stars yet, but the planets, certainly. We've got probes out in the Oort cloud, for God's sakes. These are major accomplishments for savanna apes, okay? So this is pretty cool shit. Now, and we are able to, despite all our faults, at least some of us are able to say, this is a bad thing. We have a hole in the ozone layer and it's being caused by this type of chemicals that we have in our sprays. Maybe we could pass a worldwide law that says that CFCs are banned so that they don't contribute to this destruction of our ozone layer. And every once in a while, we are able to come together and do stuff like that. So I am not writing off human beings. I think that we have the capacity for taking care of each other, for advancing the greater good of not just ourselves, others, the planet, the whole bit. Yes, some of us are insanely selfish, and unfortunately, some of those bastards rise to power and basically start tearing things apart. But the fact of the matter is, on an individual basis, and even as a group, we have been able to come together and do amazing things, including build cities, take care of each other, build medical infrastructure to take care of the people who are sick and aged and whatever else. We're amazing creatures, and I don't want to take that away from us, which doesn't negate the possibility that there's still something better, or at the very least, smarter than us out there that we can't take advantage of in trying to make ourselves better. I don't see an artificial intelligence as replacing us. Never do. Okay. I don't deny the possibility that there could be something that is brighter than us. And in fact, I have to think that the universe is teeming with intelligences greater than ours. But that doesn't change the fact that we couldn't partner with something that's smarter than us to make things even better for each other. And that's the way I see all of it. Not as a replacement, but as co-intelligences, co-people, co-friends.
And I think that one of the things that they talk about, AI is going to eliminate 30% of jobs. I've heard that in various places.
Keep
But
a roof over my head, feed me, and I'm totally cool with that.
Yeah.
That's conservative.
Yeah. But
That's
realistically,
that's with what we could imagine a year ago.
and part of me is worried about that. For me, well, not so much for me because I'm hopefully going to retire soon, but for my kids and others. But part of me thinks that as we've gone through and increased our use of technology or cars or anything else, it has eliminated other jobs. And the people that were previously in those jobs needed to re-educate and take on new jobs. I guess the question will be, are there new jobs to take on as AI progresses? Presumably there will be.
This is where we get down to the realism of transition.
Yeah.
This, what we've talked about here, we've gotten philosophical about, which I think we do need to do, because we're going to see this in our lifetime. Even with the short amount of lifespan I think I have left, I'm going to see all this, unless I die tomorrow. But realistically, the odds are I'll see a superior intelligence. I think personally it's much closer than anybody thinks, but that's a different story. But it doesn't matter whether I'm wrong by a factor of 2 or 3. It doesn't matter. We will see that. But now we've got this whole idea of experiential learning with robotics means that the things that we have as humans are going to go by the way. And right now, like I said, when I said this technology, Honda in China, and I know everybody thinks, like J.D. Vance makes me just crazy. They're peasants. They're not peasants. They live in incredible cities. They have more engineers than graduated than we could ever do. And this is why I just laugh when people say, we're going to move chip manufacturing to the U.S. Oh, great. Where are you going to get the engineers? That's why Tim Cook, what people say, oh, they moved all this stuff to China. They had to. It's Tim Cook said, if I advertise for engineers even down Silicon Valley, I'm going to get a hotel room full if I'm lucky. In China, I go and advertise and I get 3 football fields full of people, all with advanced engineering degrees from some of the top universities in the world. We are willfully blind to this.
Yep.
Now, all of that is applied to their industry now. They have factories that operate totally dark, nobody in them. And they have engineers that run those. And those people are are supplying the engineering talent that runs that. We're still talking about saving a car industry. And so with today's technology in that environment, in that Chinese environment, Honda got rid of 30% of their staff with just modern advancements in robotics, which are still fairly primitive. 30% doing the jobs that only humans could do before. We're just, Mark Twain said, denial's not a river in Egypt. We are at such denial of when this accelerates, how big the job loss is going to be. Yep. By the time Donald Trump gets all of the auto factories moved out of Canada in there, they won't need them. The next realm of big plants they build, they're going to build like the Chinese because they're not stupid. And we've talked about BMW's already got robots on the line. So we need to start planning the jobs of tomorrow.
Yes.
And that means some serious retraining. That means looking at things where you've got transferable skills. We don't have enough plumbers. We don't have enough electricians. These are not bad jobs. These pay well. You don't have to go to university for 8 years to be a plumber, but you do have to be smart. And by the way, I don't want to trivialize this because most of these trades involve a high degree of skill now. The same way that when I take my car into the mechanic, I worked in a garage when I was a kid. I couldn't find anything in my engine. These guys who we think he's a mechanic, they're working with sophisticated engineering tools to run a very
And
sophisticated
computers.
machine.
Yeah. But even those things, mechanics, electricians, plumbers, once the dexterity is there, and I know it's
Yep.
there, just maybe not exactly where it needs
Not
to be
evenly
yet.
distributed yet. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
But it's once that is there, what's to stop AI robots from being able to do
won't.
these things?
It won't. But
Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah,
saying,
but-
we need a transition strategy. So like we can't just stop and wait for the overlords
No.
to come. They won't get here fast enough. So we
No.
need a transition strategy that takes you through places where, and what I'm saying is where you take technical occupations and you train engineering skills. There's no shortage of things right now that AI will not be able to keep. We talked about homelessness. Working with a person face to face on the street, doing those things, really good thing for society to do. There are we won't run out of things to do. What we will run out of is the money to pay for those things in the incredibly stupid system we have, where Elon Musk can sit on $400 billion and some kid goes to school hungry. And I'm not anti-cap. People should have money. They should earn it. They should get rewards and all that sort of stuff. But we can't have a system that distributes income like this and an AI-driven or automated society. We'll have riots.
But let's
Okay,
not forget, AI is
go ahead,
only,
please.
sorry, it'll be brief. AI is basically only 2.5 years old. If we go from when ChatGPT came around, right? So we're talking 2.5 years. And look at the advancements that we've got. Look at the advancements we've had in the last, 3 to 6 months. And it's going to increase exponentially. So just imagine where we're going to be 5 years or 10 years from now. It's fascinating, but it's also somewhat frightening. So yeah, I think it's going to be a bumpy ride. But anyway, sorry, Marcel, you were
No.
going to say
I was
something.
going to point out that the greatest barrier to solutions in the entire world is greed. Okay, the idea that if somebody else, it's this idea that we measure success by how much we have and how little the next person has. The idea of keeping up with the Joneses is like the simplest version of that idea. Oh, they have a new car and I don't. Therefore, I have to up the ante by getting an even newer car or better car or something like this.
Yep.
Human greed is the core of all our problems. The idea that there's somebody on the street who is homeless, okay? But if they get something, it somehow takes something. If somebody has a roof over their head who didn't have one yesterday, somehow takes something away from the fact that I have one over my head for my entire life, okay? This is a really stupid and evil part of human nature that we have to divest ourselves from. And the idea that you have to work to have the right to live is also evil.
I have to stop you there. This is not human, okay? We make this mistake because somebody's going to say, well, the woke mind virus got him. But the history and the anthropology mind virus got me. We came out of a particular civilization or particular society, which grew out of mostly Western Europe and other theories and other things that came up that dominated because of its advancements in technology. And that's the essence of what we've done. We wiped out cultures in this continent who did not think of wealth like that, who had tremendous accomplishments, who had societies. Our whole society of government, our whole Western government is taken from the Iroquois nations around here. And you can go back and track that. If anybody wants to say that's an idiocy that couldn't possibly happen, I will walk you through the history of it. On the West Coast, there were large numbers of people living happily with the world, and they thought wealth was what you gave away. In other words, the idea of somebody being wealthy was what you gave away, not what you kept. This is not natural human. Even this whole idea of survival of the fittest, when you look back anthropologically, you will see that people who had disabilities were taken care of in tribes that were supposedly hunter-gatherers. What is the logic in that unless we as humans do have something transcendent? We've gotten into a greed-oriented society, and we took that as our theory of mind. It's not the only theory of mind, which is why, like I said, when I come back to this and my thing with the dolphins and my thing with the idea of a new theory of mind, I'm not so sure I'm worried about that as much anymore.
One of the things that you're referencing there, Jim, and I think it's an important one, but there's a book that I read a couple of years ago when it came out by David Graeber and David Weingart called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity. I think that should be an absolute must read for everyone. It is absolutely spectacular. It's eye-opening, and it's a great way to rewire your view of how we got here. So
It
I
blew my
recommend
mind.
that one.
It blew my
So you did
mind.
read it.
And if you find that stuff ponderous, get the audiobook, because it's quite ponderous text. But get the audiobook and listen to it while you're making dinner. It will at least give you a view that says maybe it's not going to be so bad after all, which brings us back to this idea of we have a transition period. We don't have a lot of time, and we have to find out a way to distribute income because we're going to hit the end of work. And something, the end of work is not a bad thing. I know lots of people who've retired who are contributing greatly to our work, and they're not getting paid for it. So this idea of it has to be for a profit or nothing good happens, BF&S, which is an acronym. Yep. I'll use my acronym there, but that's,
yes. Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And the fact is, if we could wrap our heads around the idea that if our basic needs, and I keep coming back to, if our basic needs are taken care of, okay, then we can figure everything else out. Most of our problems come from the fact that you only have so many hours in the day to deal with the really important things. The really important things aren't what you do sitting at that desk at the office all day long. That's how you make sure that you have enough to eat and your kids have enough to eat, and you have a roof over your head, and you can take care of getting to and from places when you need to. That is the purpose of that work. It's not like Protestant work ethic bullshit aside. That's not what it's about. You do it because you need to do it to survive. If we are creating a world of abundant, super abundant intelligence that is capable of creating the workforce of tomorrow, like Trump and his buddies are talking about bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., reopening the coal mines, all that sort of stuff. Nobody wants those jobs. Who is happy to do those jobs? Robots are happy to do those jobs. And AIs can build innumerable robots, enough to replace all of us. And as you pointed out, John, dexterity is no longer a problem for robots. Yep. We've pretty much got that down pat. We've got robots that can lick freaking stamps and put them on envelopes. Not that anybody needs to put a stamp on an envelope anymore, but the robot has that kind of dexterity. There's a robot that can do it.
I thought the paperclip thought experience as much. Yeah.
They always talked about work to live to work. Could you imagine a society where we could actually live to live and let the robots do all the work?
Imagine all the people.
Oh my God, now he's going to sing.
Yeah. No, but so in the short run, in our work lives, is which what this program was supposed to be about, but never mind.
I don't know what is this program about?
But no, but in the short run, the things we could do, a 4-day week becomes something we can think about. A 3-day week becomes something we can think about. And this is what I mean by planning the transition period. The stuff that's going to happen, ladies and gentlemen, you aren't going to stop it. Nobody's ever stopped technology. It's going to happen. The question is how we use it, in which case you need to get involved and have your voice in terms of how we're going to distribute wealth. But in the next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, 5 years, we need to adapt to the fact we are going to have robotic or agentic companions and workers. And that is going to lead to some things that we need to start thinking about. And now at the end of the program, we'll get down to the detail of it, but it's going to mean we need to start thinking about these. In security, John, identity management.
Yep.
You've got robot identities. You have scope of
Mm-hmm.
control for them. In HR, you're going to have to deal with the fact of how do I deal with the integration of these and the training of these new employees. In terms of management, you're going to have to say, how do I manage them? In terms of change management, we're going to have to start thinking about how do I integrate them and still not freak out my employees? We
Yes.
have a lot ahead of us corporately that we have to also deal with. But I honestly believe that this was a worthwhile discussion because you need to expand your mindset and conceive of what's happening so that you can start to think your way through it.
There's a little video clip that I posted in the chat here. You should maybe just include it in the show notes. It's really quite fascinating because I realized that we walked real far away from the paper there of how machines can learn, the next step in machines learning. But there's a video on YouTube that's going around right now of a robot dog that has been basically turned on, activated, but given no instructions on how to walk, on how to do anything. Okay. And they're basically starting it from scratch. You know, when a baby deer is born or one of these animals and they're desperately trying to get up on their legs, and it's like this comical sort of thing. Mom is pushing it along a little tiny bit, but it has to figure out how this whole gravity thing works and how to move and so on. This video is really cool because they do this with a robot dog. And it starts out by just being this folded thing on the ground. And then it tries to move its legs and it tries to figure out how to balance and so on. And this is a new way of thinking. We've built up, and this is part of this whole era of experience. We've built up this idea that we have to feed in all this information ahead of time, as opposed to letting these systems learn on their own. And what they do with this robot dog is they let it learn on its own. NVIDIA has this virtual world where robots can learn to do like a gazillion different things. Okay. And it's very cool because they all learn at the same time to do these particular things, but it requires a humongous amount of data being fed in. This dog learns on its own, but as I saw a video, and I'm going to try to find it as well so we can include it, but I saw a video where they have a new technique where robots who are tied into AI systems or whatever learn by watching people in YouTube videos. Okay.
I've got that video. This was another transition of the experiential thing. And I'm sorry, it's in my notes. We got talking about so many things, but this idea that they've actually come up with this thing, they've got a great acronym for it. I can't remember what it is. It's RHYME is the acronym, but I can't remember what it stands for. And they have used this again, instead of trying to teach it like a human, they give it to experientially learn from its own experiences like a robot. And they've found that instead of tens of hundreds of hours of mechanical exercises and data to train a robot, they can actually let it watch YouTube. Now, I think they should be restricted in what they show on YouTube.
Yes. If they're under 18, they shouldn't be watching TikTok. And
yeah, no, but the idea that a half-hour YouTube video and somebody can learn something, which, by the way, is how I learn half the crap I do now. If I'm not asking AI how to do something step by step, I go and watch a YouTube video. And so we're going to train these, and this is what I got down to, the things we need to think about. We're going to be training these robots. And these guys are coming up saying we could do it with YouTube videos. This is the ingenuity. This is why when you get to the acceleration factor, and I keep talking about this acceleration factor, there's a point where you hit with Malcolm Gladwell used to call it the tipping point. You get to a tipping point and then everything happens. And we're getting to the tipping point.
Yep.
And so get ready for it. But these are the crazy, who'd think about something like this? Make your robot watch a YouTube video. Somebody did and made it work. And we'll see more and more of that. And we're going to have to adapt to that. And we're going to have to learn that. This is what I mean about, we have some learning to do. Desi Arnaz used to say, Lucy, you got some splaining to do. We've got some learning to do. And we better start learning it corporately, because your career it's going to matter in your career. The people who do this, you remember that old line about you're not going to be replaced by AI, you're going to be replaced by people who use AI better.
Use AI.
It's going to come in spades for management.
Yep.
So I've just pasted a link to neuroscience news that talks about the AI robot visual learning system, RHYME, which I love I love acronyms. I'm more fond of TLAs than I am of A's because those require 4 letters.
I still like RESPECT, but that's the musician in. But yeah, so and I've got to do something. I'm getting the website revamped, which has kept me from posting show notes, but I will post show notes tomorrow for sure for this show. So you can see these links. But the best thing for the audience to do, if you're listening to this, is go either to technewsday.com, look at the podcast page, look at this, and I'll have a link to the Discord channel that we have, which people are joining, and you can pick up this stuff. And being on Discord's worth it just so you can just watch the stuff that Marcel posts, if nothing else.
Yeah.
But you can also join us in a discussion. And if you're on YouTube, I'll put the link in there. And if you have problems getting on, email me at editorial@technewsday.ca, or find me on LinkedIn, and we'll find a way to help you join. And I know John has been doing the hosting and welcoming people, which is also very wonderful. So there'll be somebody who says hello to you.
That's because John is a much more welcoming person than you or I, Jim.
He's a more well-rounded human being than we are, but that's...
He is.
I'm just trying to find my niche
pinnacle
where
that we
I fit
aspire
in.
to.
Yeah.
No, you are the pinnacle that we aspire to. You are the reason in this whirlwind of whatever the hell it is we're doing here.
Yeah.
Marcel,
John's
can you
who I want
post
to
those?
be when I grow up.
Oh God, then you're in trouble. Can you post those links in the Discord channel too, Marcel?
I'm doing it right now. I'm going to post
you
it
go.
in the Project Synapse under episodes as opposed to the podcast episodes. I've got to come up with a better way to name these things. But I'm writing, we are currently recording this podcast, and here are the links that we're discussing. So
Perfect.
Bing,
Good.
bing.
And the paper, we'll put a link to the paper, the Welcome to
That
Every
too.
Yes.
Experience.
That's
And
well
I
worth
think,
a read for people.
like I said, I think in terms of all of the stuff that I've read, I think 2017 Attention is All You Need. The paper you remarked on, Marcel, I haven't read. The one on
The
alternative
2019?
intelligence. Yeah. But
The bitter lesson.
yeah,
That- Posting too.
yeah, I'm going to go back and reread that as well. And we will put a link to the book that Marcel mentioned. Why that's not taught in every high school, I do not know. It is an anthropological look at society that actually uses facts. And these guys have been quite thorough in their examination of other societies, and never disparaging to what we call Western society, but just saying there's alternate ways of living. And we've done them for tens of thousands of years.
And we've started and stopped multiple times. There used to be this idea that society went like this, living in caves or whatever, on the savannah, stone tools, and then suddenly we have the birth of agriculture and then the Industrial Revolution. But the fact of the matter is, societies have come in and out of these various ways of living countless times through the centuries. Industrialization, or the use of tools, didn't just happen at one time. Agriculture was developed and then abandoned with societies that went back to hunting and gathering. Like, this back and forth has happened numerous times. People have built cities, abandoned them, and gone back to lifestyles where they just move from place to place with the seasons. So it's not like the human experiment is this straight line into the future. And in fact, this is actually one of the problems that we have when we're confronted with the developments in AI today, is we think linearly, as in things move at a steady pace toward the future, whatever that happens to be. But that's not the way it works. If you take a look at human evolution through tens of thousands of years, first of all, I'll say this first, but if you take a look at that doubling every 30 years or so has been happening since the dawn of time. It's just that we don't understand the concept of that kind of progression. We think linearly. Things are pretty much today the way they were yesterday, is the way that our Stone Age brains are meant to think. And in an exponential growth world, we have a really tough time accepting that things can actually work that way. I guess the idea is that we have to understand human beings 40,000 years ago, neurologically speaking, are basically identical to the human beings of today. We haven't really changed in tens of thousands of years. Yeah, there have been little modifications. There's like a third vein that's appearing in people. And so evolution continues. But neurologically speaking, if you took somebody from 40,000 years ago, a child from 40,000 years ago, you could teach them to grow up in our world and they wouldn't be any different than anybody else. And that's a hard thing for us to wrap our heads around because we have this idea that we've been, getting smarter and smarter through the centuries. Not so much.
Yeah, and other things that we do, we mistake the creation of money for the creation of value. And so
Yeah.
we are symbolic brains, and we can't think the way it's always been is the way it's always going to be. And I think that's a good point for us then. We're at the non-linear point in our history. Whether we call it a tipping point, whatever we call it, we do hit non-linear times in history, and that's where we are. But like I said, on the corporate side of it, I think we've covered some of the things I think people need to think about. We may continue this discussion further. Love to hear from people whether they thought this was as interesting as I did. I came into it with a thought of what discussion we're going to have. Equally pleased to have this one.
I think all of the stuff that we talked about today are things that we need to be talking about because things are going to change and we need to be prepared for it.
Right. And that's our show. If you've stayed to the end and you've listened to this, bless you.
We love you.
Join us on the Discord channel and we'll talk to you more about it. That's our show. If you're listening to this and you spent the time with us, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
There we go.
Oh man, I got I got it right.
Hey,
Okay.
I got it right.
Little problem. Yeah, little arthritis in the Spock hand. Yeah.